The anime begins with Touka Mimori, who is a pathetic, disgusting loser for not eating his meal. He pleads and apologizes repeatedly, but his mother pays him no attention and leads him to the mercy of his stepfather's feet. He suddenly wakes up on a bus, as Sogo Ayaka, the class president, tells Shogo Oyamata to give back her novel. He makes fun of her reading preferences, surprised that she's actually into romance novels despite leading people to believe otherwise. She asks him if there's a problem with her choices, and he belittles her, saying he could never read something like that because his brain cells will evaporate. While the scuffle is going on, Takao Hijiri notices that Takao Itsuki, her younger sister, is lost in the mountain scenery outside, but she tells her to pay more attention to what's happening on the bus. Ayaka tells Oyamata to give back her novel, since he isn't interested in it, but he's reluctant to grant her wish. He asks for her social media handle in return for the novel, but she declined his request. The bus was taking the class on their field trip, and while the banter between the president and Oyamata was going on, Touka considered stepping in. Still, he realized he would be too insignificant to do anything effective. He decides to remain indifferent. Just like the Takao sisters and their class teacher, Ayaka asks Oyamata to give back her novel once again, but he insists that she must share her social media handle with him before she can get back her novel. Ayaka remains persistent when Touka suddenly gets up, telling Oyamata to give back her novel. While Oyamata was surprised that Touka stood up for Ayaka, Touka was even more surprised to see himself standing because he didn't know when his body moved on impulse. Oyamata recognizes him, but wonders what gave him the guts to tell him what to do. Touka tries to reason with Oyamata, telling him to give back Ayaka's novel because she's getting annoyed by his mischief. Oyamata laughs off the Touka's show of chivalry, and he wonders where he suddenly got the confidence from. Takuto Kurihara, one of the class elites, tells Oyamata to return Ayaka's novel, but Oyamata, for some support in putting Touka in his place, Takuto tells him he has no interest in such frivolities, and Oyamata is jealous of Takuto's cool aura. Takuto tells him he can ignore Touka, but he must give back Ayaka's novel because it doesn't sit right with him. Asagi Senjo commends Takuto for stepping up for Ayaka, as Oyamata hands over the novel to her. Other students silently commend Takuto for being so nice despite being an elite student. Oyamata takes his seat behind Yasu Tomohiro and he begins kicking his chair from behind, questioning him about what gave Touka the audacity to stand up to him. Yasu quivers in fear, apologizing for his earlier actions, but the teacher cuts in, telling him to quit bothering Yasu. Touka was also surprised that he had the confidence to stand up to Oyamata, and he concluded that his dream was the cause because it put him on edge. While Oyamata complains about his grand moment being ruined by Touka, the goddess chants an incantation which suddenly teleports all the students to a hall. They wonder if they're in some kind of dream, as they all suddenly appear in an unknown location. Goddess Vicious addresses them, welcoming them as heroes to alien her kingdom. She informs them that heroes are summoned to fight the great demon emperor anytime he appears. The demon emperor was once defeated 200 years ago by the combined efforts of heroes, but he was recently resurrected again, prompting the need for the summoning of new heroes. The goddess begs the new heroes from other worlds for their strength to take down such a big threat to her kingdom's prosperity. The students still have a hard time wrapping their heads around what the goddess is trying to say. Their teacher suddenly calms them down, reassuring them that everything will be alright since he's with them. Though he doesn't fully understand their present predicament, he tells them they need to pay attention to whatever the goddess says for clarity. The goddess thanks him for that and he smiles sheepishly, trying to get into her good books. Touka looks around, noting the stone walls, the old-fashioned bonfires, the armored soldiers, and the features of the goddess. Despite all he could see, he still wasn't convinced that they were in another world. Takuto wonders what will happen if they refuse to cooperate, and she tells them that they're stuck there regardless because she can't take them back to their world. Takuto asks her if there's a way back, and she tells them that it can only be done through the reverse summoning event, which requires a special magic element called the evil element. This element can only be obtained from the heart of the great demon emperor or the absorbance of the elements released when the emperor perishes into a special necklace. Oyamata is pissed, wondering what the demon emperor has to do with them because they're from another. The goddess gets on her knees, begging them to act as heroes and become the messiah of everyone in her kingdom. Ayaka explains to the goddess that they can't be as much help even if she considers them their messiah, because they're just humans. The goddess tells them they have power as no other humans have, and Touka suddenly feels a strange tingling sensation. She explains that the powers were bestowed upon them as she summoned them to her world, but Oyamata doesn't believe her, and he tells her to stop playing pranks on them. The goddess orders her guard to release a demon wolf on a prisoner, which it wastes no time devouring. She then takes out the wolf using a fireball spell, which surprises everyone. The students are now convinced that they're in an entirely different world than the one they're used to. The goddess asks them to approach a crystal ball individually so their skills can be revealed to them. Each student approaches the ball and their magic powers are appraised, but when Oyamata approaches the ball and places his hand on it, it gives off a bright red color, which surprises the mages. Oyamata is so impressed with his skills shown off by the crystal that he decides to accept his inevitable role as the messiah of the new world. Takuto walks up to the crystal ball to measure his magic abilities, but the crystal ball gets so overloaded that it breaks. The goddess praises him for being an S-rank hero and Oyamata runs over to her, wondering what rank he's in. She informs him that he is an A-rank hero, and he's disappointed that he couldn't outclass Takuto. Ayaka steps up to test her magic skills, and she also breaks the crystal ball, earning the S rank. Hijiri follows suit, breaking the crystal and also earning the S rank qualification. The goddess is amazed at the luck she had in just one summoning ritual, because getting an S rank hero is very rare, but she managed to get 3 at once. Touka steps up to test his abilities, but the crystal ball only gives off a dull purple color, which makes the goddess conclude that he's insignificant. She ignores him and calls up the next person to detect their magic ability, and Touka walks away dejectedly because he's still treated like a background character, even in a different world. He decides to accept that as his reality because he won't be getting any special treatment. Yasu steps up to measure his magic, and the goddess is impressed because he's giving off the same aura as the Dark Hero, who is one of the strongest heroes in the past. The goddess shows the heroes how to check their stats, and Touka decides to look at his stats. He's disappointed in how average his stats are, but he notices that he has the inherent skill of abnormal state endowment. The goddess explains that the inherent skill is unique to each individual, but Oyamata is fed up with her yapping and he tells her to quit explaining. His teacher tries to put him in order, but Oyamata tells the teacher he has no right to talk to an A rank like that because he's just a D rank hero. The goddess informs them that they're about to perform an important ritual, and she calls Touka up, but he's not enthusiastic about it. The guards force him forward as the goddess explains that the lowest ranks in the past have a way of hindering the higher-ranking heroes. This heroes decided that such heroes should be disposed of, and since Touka was the lowest in that group, that was his fate. The goddess doesn't want to dispose of Touka in front of his classmates, so she decides to give him a chance to redeem himself. She tells him that he'll be sent to some ruins using the magic circle, and that if he manages to back up he will be given the free will to live peacefully in Alien. Touka wondered if he was being sent to a dangerous place, and the goddess tells him the place is very dangerous because criminals and corrupted heroes have been sent to the ruins in the past. He decides to tell her about his inherent skill, which is the abnormal state endowment skill, hoping it will help him out of his predicament. She informs him that all abnormal state skills and spells have no value in Alien because their effects and duration are too weak and short. She informs him that his unique skill is a disappointment because he can't even use it to take down low-level demons. Touka is dejected by this, but the goddess piles on the insults, telling him it would be a waste of time to level up because his stats are too low to ever become significantly high. Touka couldn't understand why he was being subjected to such a horrible fate when everything was done against his will, and he tried to protest against the goddess, but Takuto cut him off. Takuto tells him to accept his fate and get going so he doesn't keep everyone else waiting. Yasu goes over to Touka and extends out a helping hand. Touka remembers all they've been through in the past, and he's glad that Yasu is on his side, but Yasu tells him to address him with more respect because he's a higher-ranked hero. He walks away as the goddess announces the commencement of the ritual. The circle begins to glow and the goddess throws down a leather pocket, telling Touka that the pocket is his unique item. She tells him the orb on the pocket blows when infused with mana, which is all the pocket does. Ayaka suddenly protests the goddess's decision to send Touka to the ruins because he's their classmate. The goddess knocks her out while she tells everyone else to witness the fate of the only loser in their group. Touka is pissed by this and he decides to attack the goddess with a paralyzed spell, but it's dispelled by her magic bubble, which protects her against abnormal state spells. Touka's classmates make fun of him for being so powerless and he's so pissed off that they have such low impression of him. The Takao sisters walk away because they can't stand the humiliation that Touka is being put through. Touka had enough of the goddess and his classmates looking down on him. He channels that frustration and tells the goddess to be ready for his revenge if he ever makes it back alive. As the ritual is completed and he disappears, he tries to check his stats but the window refuses to come up because of lack of visibility. He locates his pocket in the darkness and he pours mana into it, making it. He begins to make his way across the ruins when he stumbles upon some skeletal remains. Touka is now scared of the monsters that could be residing in the ruins. He suddenly dodges as a minotaur monster attacks him from behind. Touka decides to run away from the monster as fast as possible, trusting his instincts to lead him through because he can feel the murderous intent of the monsters. Touka suddenly trips on a stone and falls to the ground, surrendering to his fate as a meal for the monster. He then remembers how his classmates look down on him, and he realizes that he wants power so he can teach them all a lesson. He uses his paralyzed skill on the monster but he's surprised it worked. He decides to keep running, wondering why his spell worked, when the goddess said it would be useless against low-level demons. Touka sums up his encounter as a miracle but he comes up on a bird demon and he could feel its intent to take him down. He uses his paralyzed skill again and he's surprised that it worked. He reasons that his abnormal state skills are different from the other state skills known in Alien. He realizes that he doesn't have much mana left so he uses his poison skill on the demon bird. He's worried about what will happen if he keeps using his skills and drains his mana completely. He decides to rest for a minute but the Minotaur appears again because his paralyzed skill has worn off. Touka wonders if someone will come to his rescue but he remembers that no one ever comes to his aid. He decides to keep laying waste to the monsters so that he can stay alive for as long as possible. He's ready to begin the struggle for survival in the ruins as he makes up his mind to live. The story continues. We see Touka attempts to use Paralyzed on the Minotaur again but this time the skill fails to activate, so Touka has to jump out of the way. He's informed by the system that he is not allowed to cast the same effect multiple times on a single target, so it becomes up with a new plan and casts Sleep on the Minotaur, causing it to fall to the ground unconscious. And once the monster is out cold, Touka applies poison to it as well. It looks like there are no restrictions on stacking effects, but he's out of mana so if he keeps using his skills, he will eventually burn through his stamina as well, and are still a lot more monsters for him to deal with. Touka begins spamming paralysis and eventually he has managed to stop all the monsters, but has left him on the verge of collapse. However, his troubles aren't over yet, as even more monsters begin to approach, so he has no choice but to keep using Paralyzed until his body can't take it anymore, and it's not long before he reaches his limit and can't go on. There are still a lot of monsters around him, but he knows if he tries to use his still even one more time it could mean the end of him. He has no other options available but luckily, just he's about to use up the last of his body's stamina, the cockatrice that he pours in a while ago suddenly dies and due to this memory's level shoots up until he's at level 258 and both his mana and stamina are replenished. Touka doesn't understand what happened at first, but then he notices the dead monster and realizes that he must have gotten experience because his poison killed that one, and with his energy replenished he can keep fighting as much as necessary. As he continues to spam paralysis his skill levels up, leading him to believe he can upgrade it by repeated use, but he will worry about that later since for now, he has to make sure he can escape this place alive. With his paralysis now being level 2 Touka notices that he now has the option to select multiple targets at once, so he does so and the monsters are all immediately frozen in place. So far, the status effects of have 100% success rate so Vicious is probably the only person in this world that his skill has no effect on. He begins inflicting poison on all the paralyzed monsters and eventually his poison skill levels up as well, but there are still a lot more monsters here, so that means he can level up even more. Touka takes a look at his status window and since he leveled up, his stats are far higher than they were when he first got here, especially his mana which is now over 8,000 and mana is his only way of surviving this hellhole. Touka takes a break and sits down while he waits for the poison to do its thing, and eventually the monsters begin dying one by one, raising memory's level even further. By the time he's level 500, Touka is fairly confident that he can now make it out of the ruins, so be prepared to take care of the remaining monsters. However, after seeing Touka kill dozens of them with ease, the monsters have enough common sense to know that they shouldn't mess with him, so they all run off. Now that the area is safe, Touka sifts through the piles of rotting bones in order to find any loot that he could use, and after getting his hands on a cloak and a blade, he sets off to escape the ruins. As he looks for the exit, he comes across many different monsters, but he has realized that he faces another problem. He has no food, so he's going to start soon if he doesn't get something to eat. He's so desperate that he's even willing to eat monster meat, so after retracing his steps, he returns to the monster corpses and reluctantly begins carving into them to eat what he can. However, as the eyeball pops out and Touka tries to eat it, he realizes that the monster's entire body has acid in it, so he won't be able to eat it after all. With no source of food, Touka believes he will starve to death or he ever makes it out of here. He has no energy left in his body, but then he notices the color of his magic bag changing, and since that's the only source of light he has, he frantically rushes over to supply it with more mana. However, as he does so, he feels something appear inside the bag, and to his delight he finds a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of soda. He excitedly begins eating. While this means his hunger problem is solved for now, he doesn't know for sure if he will be able to get the bag-produced food again. As days continue to pass inside the ruins, Touka has gotten used to committing mass monster genocide with his skills, but he is worried that he might be losing his humanity because of this. Back on Earth, after suffering abuse at the hands of his stepfather, Touka was on the verge of having his murderous villain arc right then and there, but before he could lose his sense of humanity, he was rescued by his aunt and uncle who took him in and gave him a sense of normalcy. He learned empathy from them and he thought he had become a normal person like them. Right now, as he is staring at the mountain of corpses beneath his feet, he feels nothing at all. There's no going back to how he was before, so Touka just accepts that he's a psychopath now and moves on. As he goes, he comes across another action of the ruins with the floating eyeball monster, but Touka just takes it out with his poison. As he moves forward, he comes across a door with a magic lock, and upon opening it he finds a small room with two skeletons inside. He assumed they must have been people that were disposed of by Vicious as well, but they weren't fortunate enough to make it out alive. He searches through the things and finds a pouch full of gems, so while he feels bad about stealing from the dead, the gems could be valuable and he could use them once he gets out of here, so he no longer feels bad about it. He goes through the other rooms nearby as well and eventually comes across one that takes a large amount of mana to open. Once he finally unlocks it, he finds a skeleton sitting with a note next to it. The note says that the skeleton was once a man known as Anglin the Great Sage, and he was the former hero of darkness, the same one Vicious had mentioned was the strongest of them all. According to Anglin's note, Vicious sent him here by force after she no longer has a need for him as a hero, and while he was powerful enough to make it this far, he clearly couldn't escape, so he left a message to help the next person who could manage to make it this far. Vicious may have said the Demon Lord was evil, but she's just as bad in Touka's eye, although we can't say he is much better than her either, since his only goal is to get revenge on her and he doesn't care if he has to destroy the world to do it. As he's looting Anglin's corpse, he comes across a book of forbidden arts, and it is full of information about recipes for medicine and magic tool instructions that could prove to be useful later, so he decides to keep it. He also finds a scroll of forbidden magic, but he doesn't understand what it says. However, if a great sage like Anglin went through all the trouble of keeping it hidden with him up until his final moments, then it must be really powerful, and it may even be strong enough for Touka to eventually defeat the goddess if he's ever able to decipher it. Touka is just about ready to leave, but before he goes, he steals Anglin's cloak because it's cooler than his old one, and takes a look at Anglin's book again, but this time he sees a bloody warning telling him to beware of the Soul Eater, and the ominous warning has me wondering if the Soul Eater is the one who killed Anglin. Touka continues making his way through the ruins until he comes across a door that he thinks will lead to the surface. However, this is truly the final door, then that must mean the Soul Eater Anglin was talking about this here as well. Touka remains cautious of his surroundings and takes a look at his stats to make sure he is prepared for this. He did all he could to ensure he leveled up as much as possible before he got here, so we can only hope that his skills are enough to defeat it. Touka eventually finds a creepy face and he is certain that this must be the Soul Eater, so he immediately attempted to use Paralyze on it, but the second he steps out of cover, the Soul Eater fires a laser into his hand. This is the first time anything has managed to stop him from using his skill, and Touka has to kill it, since the only way out is to use the gem on his forehead. To activate his skill, he needs to say it out loud and be within a certain distance, but none of that matters if the Soul Eater can attack him before he finishes casting the spell. While Touka is still thinking about what to do, the Soul Eater breaks out of the wall to go after him, so he really has no choice but to fight now. Meanwhile, outside the ruins, a girl is trying to escape from her pursuers and decides to hide nearby, not knowing their fierce battle is taking place inside. As the Soul Eater slowly approaches Touka, he wonders why it hasn't fired its lasers at him yet, but he soon finds out why as the Soul Eater spits up some purple gum which takes the form of humans. These are the souls of the people the Soul Eater has killed, and they are being forced to attack Touka, so if he's forced to paralyze them. However, he can't bring himself to use poison because they are still human. Even if they become gross globs of paste, The Soul Eater enjoys watching as Touka struggles because he can't attack the souls for moral reasons, and he can't attack the Soul Eater either because it would react too fast. Touka begins breaking down and crying a lot because he says he doesn't want to hurt other people, and he's losing aura by the minute with his constant crying, but as the Soul Eater is reveling in Touka's tears, he reveals that it was all an act as he paralyzes the Soul Eater. He knew he could never land a successful paralyze on the Soul Eater unless he managed to get it to lower its guard, so if he pretended to be in the middle of a mental crisis just so the Soul Eater wouldn't suspect anything, and now that the Soul Eater is paralyzed, Touka doesn't really care what happens to the souls if he kills the Soul Eater, and even though he spent so much time trying to become a harmless law-abiding citizen, all he cares about are facts. Those soul puppets were trying to kill him so they could be babies. All he cares, he's still going to poison them anyway. The Soul Eater struggles to move out of frustration that it lost to Touka, and this lets Touka know that powerful monsters can try to overcome his paralysis, but it does additional damage to their bodies. That's interesting at all, but he doesn't want to waste any more time here. So he casts poison on the Soul Eater and destroys it once and for all. Upon doing so, the souls that the Soul Eater consumed are released, and they all appear in front of Touka to thank him for freeing them. They've been rooting for him as he tried to survive the ruins, and none of them really mind the fact that he looted their bodies either. Touka is then approached by Anglin, and he has only one thing to say. He wants Touka to take down the goddess and avenge them all. The souls of the dead pass on after that, and while Touka normally wouldn't accept a request without some sort of compensation, he was already planning on taking her down anyway, and now that the final monster has been defeated, Touka can open the door and begin his quest for revenge on the surface. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.